A mother's love. It was a warm evening in late September when Grace Thompson last saw her son, Derrick. The night had settled softly over the neighborhood. A stillness in the air that felt almost sacred. Derrick, with his usual vibrant smile, had hugged her tightly before leaving. She remembered the warmth of his embrace, the feel of his strong arms around her, and the quiet promise she felt in that hug, a silent assurance of safety, of home. But nothing prepared her for the phone call that shattered her world. As the clock struck midnight, a call from an unknown number broke the silence. Grace answered, her heart already heavy with an unexplainable dread. The voice on the other end was calm. Too calm. It told her that Derrick had been involved in an incident with the police. She could barely comprehend what followed, a series of phrases like tragic circumstances, altercation, and regrettable outcome. Her mind refused to process the words. Her boy, her bright, loving son, was gone. Grace's legs gave way beneath her as she dropped to the floor, the weight of grief crashing over her like a relentless tide. She clutched at her chest, feeling as if her heart was being torn out, one agonizing beat at a time. In that single moment, everything she'd ever loved, every hope and dream she'd carried for Derrick, shattered into pieces. Her son was gone, taken from her by those sworn to protect. A community grieves. The news of Derrick's death spread quickly, casting a dark shadow over their neighborhood. Friends, family, and neighbors gathered at her house, offering whispered condolences and sorrowful hugs. Yet, amidst the condolences and flowers left on her doorstep, Grace felt an aching emptiness. Each story she heard from her neighbors, each tear shed, only added to her burning questions. Why had this happened? And why was Derrick gone? Grace noticed, however, that there was something deeper in their eyes, an anger, a frustration, a shared pain that seemed to simmer beneath the surface. She realized she was not the only one who had lost a loved one to the brutality of those in power. Derrick was not the first, and he wouldn't be the last. The injustice was woven into their community like an invisible thread, binding them all in a cycle of fear and loss. But this time, it felt different. This time, she couldn't just accept it. This time, she felt a fire stirring within her, a voice whispering that something had to change. The seed of resolve. In the days following Derrick's funeral, Grace found herself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, thoughts churning in her mind like a storm. She couldn't let Derrick's death be in vain. She couldn't stand the idea that he would simply become another forgotten name. Another son, brother, friend, lost to senseless violence. She began asking questions. She went to the precinct, demanding answers from the officers involved in the incident, but was met with walls of silence and cold stares. Her desperation turned to anger as she realized the system had no intention of holding anyone accountable. Her son's life meant nothing to them. To them, Derrick was just a statistic, a casualty in a system designed to silence voices like his and hers. Then, one night, she made a decision. She would not be silent. She would not be afraid. If the system wanted to ignore her, she would make them hear her. If they wanted to forget Derrick, she would make sure his memory lived on in a way that could not be erased. The first vigil. Grace organized a candlelight vigil in Derrick's honor. She reached out to community leaders, church pastors, and activists, calling on anyone who would listen. She printed flyers, handed them out to neighbors, taped them to storefronts, and left them on every doorstep she could reach. The night of the vigil, she dressed in black, standing alone at first beneath the streetlights as the crowd slowly gathered. As people arrived, They held candles, their faces illuminated in a soft glow. Each flame a small act of defiance against the darkness that had claimed Derrick's life. Grace felt a surge of strength as she saw them all standing together, united by shared grief and anger. She stepped forward, clearing her throat, her voice trembling but steady. "Derrick was my son," she began, her voice rising above the murmurs of the crowd. "He was a kind, brilliant young man with dreams bigger than this city. He wanted to make a difference, to leave this world better than he found it. But that dream was stolen from him, taken by those who were supposed to protect him. And I am here tonight to say that we will not let his memory fade." Her voice grew stronger with every word, fueled by the emotions she had kept buried for days. "They want us to be silent. They want us to be afraid. But I refuse to let my son's life be just another tragedy. We must stand together. We must demand justice, not just for Derrick, but for every life taken unjustly. For every family left shattered by senseless violence." As she spoke, Grace could feel the energy in the crowd shift, their silent sorrow transforming into something more powerful: solidarity, resolve, a shared determination that sparked within each of them. The crowd began to chant Derrick's name, their voices echoing through the streets. A chorus of hope and defiance, a spark of change. The vigil became more than just a memorial. It became a call to action. In the days that followed, people in the community began reaching out to her, sharing their own stories of loss and injustice. She started receiving letters, emails, even calls from people in other cities who had heard her story and wanted to support her cause. The movement was small at first, a few dozen people joining her at city council meetings, a handful of journalists willing to write about Derrick's case, but Grace could feel something growing. Something she had never expected, a sense of hope. With every step she took, Grace felt her grief transforming. Her pain, her anger, became the fuel that drove her forward. She was not just a mother mourning her son. She was a mother demanding justice. Not just for Derrick, but for everyone who had ever been silenced by the weight of oppression. As the nights passed, she stood on the threshold of something much larger than herself. Something she couldn't yet name. All she knew was that she would not stop. Not until her son's death had meaning. Not until the world knew his name, and the names of countless others like him. And in that moment, Grace Thompson's journey began. A journey that would test her spirit, challenge her beliefs, and transform her pain into a weapon of change. She was ready to fight, not with fists, but with words, with courage, and with a strength that could not be broken after the vigil. Grace returned to a home that felt unbearably empty. Derrick's room remained untouched, his bed neatly made, his books and posters still in place. She would often find herself sitting there, surrounded by his things, hoping to feel close to him again. The silence was overwhelming, pressing down on her until it felt suffocating. In the quiet, she could almost hear his laughter, his voice, a cruel reminder of what had been taken from her. But even in her darkest moments, when the weight of grief threatened to consume her, Grace felt a quiet, steady pulse of determination beneath her pain. It was a feeling she couldn't fully understand. Something raw and unyielding, urging her forward. In her quietest moments, she felt a truth she could not ignore: Derrick's death was not an ending, it was the beginning of something greater. And while she didn't yet know where this path would lead, she knew she could not turn back. The first steps of resistance. Grace began spending her days researching, poring over reports and statistics, learning about similar cases of police brutality and racial injustice. She was horrified to discover how many families shared her pain. How many young lives had been lost to the same merciless cycle. Each name she read felt like another blow. Another confirmation that her son's death was part of a much larger pattern. The thought of so many lives lost, so many dreams shattered, left her feeling both enraged and deeply saddened. But it also made her realize one thing: she was not alone. Determined to fight, Grace reached out to local civil rights organizations, hoping to find allies in her quest for justice. Most of them were sympathetic but cautious. They warned her of the risks, the inevitable backlash, the likely futility of seeking justice in a system that rarely held its own accountable. But Grace's resolve only grew stronger. She refused to let her son's life be reduced to a cautionary tale or a fleeting headline. Derrick had mattered. His life had value. And she would fight to make sure the world understood that. Facing the system. In the weeks that followed, Grace began a relentless pursuit of justice. Filing complaints, seeking records, and attending city council meetings. She would sit in the front row, her presence a silent challenge to those in power. At first, the officials dismissed her, barely acknowledging her existence. But Grace refused to be ignored. Every time they spoke, she raised her voice louder, questioning their commitment to justice, demanding answers about Derrick's case, pressing for accountability in ways that left them visibly uncomfortable. The local media took notice, reporters occasionally approaching her after meetings. Intrigued by her persistence, they would ask her questions, some respectful, others loaded with thinly veiled skepticism, and she would respond with unflinching honesty. Grace's story began to appear in local newspapers, her image a symbol of a mother's relentless love and resilience. Slowly, her story started to reach more people, sparking a conversation that had long been silenced in her community. The gathering storm. As Grace's determination grew, so did the resistance she faced. Her phone rang at odd hours. Anonymous voices warning her to stop, to let things be. Friends and neighbors began whispering that maybe she was pushing too hard, that she was putting herself and them at risk. Some urged her to grieve quietly, to move on, as if forgetting was an option. But every doubt, every whispered warning only hardened her resolve. She could not, would not, allow Derrick's death to be swept under the rug. Just another story forgotten by time. One evening, as she was leaving a meeting at City Hall, she noticed a police cruiser idling near the entrance. Two officers watched her, their expressions cold and unyielding. As she walked past them, they muttered something under their breath, words laced with menace, intended to intimidate. But Grace looked them in the eye, her gaze unwavering, refusing to be cowed by their silent threats. She understood now that her journey would not be easy, that it would be fraught with challenges and opposition. But Derrick had always believed in standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. And now, she would honor his memory by doing the same. The power of a community. As Grace continued her fight, her story began to resonate with others in her neighborhood. People started stopping her on the street, sharing their own stories of loss and pain, opening up about loved ones who had been taken too soon, silenced by the same oppressive forces. Mothers, fathers, brothers, and sisters found a voice in Grace, and she found strength in their shared experiences. She realized that her fight for Derrick was not just for him, it was for all of them. For every family that had been shattered by the same system that had taken her son. One night, a group of young activists approached her after a council meeting. They were fierce and passionate, determined to support her cause. They offered to help organize rallies, create petitions, and build a movement that would demand change. Grace felt a surge of hope, a sense that she was no longer standing alone. With their help, she began organizing a larger demonstration. One that would bring the community together to demand justice and accountability. A voice for the voiceless. The day of the demonstration arrived. And Grace stood at the front of the crowd, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. Hundreds of people had gathered, holding signs, chanting Derrick's name, demanding change. The air was thick with a tension that was both daunting and exhilarating. A feeling of collective power that Grace had never experienced before. As she took the microphone, she looked out at the sea of faces. Each one a testament to the power of resilience. Each one a reminder that her fight was not in vain. Today, we stand here not just for Derrick, but for every voice that has been silenced, she began. Her voice trembling but resolute. We stand here because enough is enough. We will not be ignored. We will not be silenced. And we will not stop until justice is served. The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices rising in a wave of unity and defiance. Grace felt a surge of strength, a sense of purpose that transcended her grief. She was no longer just a mother mourning her son. She was a voice for the voiceless, a beacon of hope in a world that so often turned a blind eye to injustice. As the demonstration continued, Grace realized that her journey had only just begun. She knew there would be challenges ahead, that the path would be fraught with obstacles and resistance. But she also knew that she was not alone. She had a community behind her, a collective strength that would carry her forward. And in that moment, Grace understood that her fight for Derrick's memory was not just a battle, it was a movement. One that would change lives. One that would echo far beyond the streets of her neighborhood. The awakening of a symbol. As the night drew to a close, Grace found herself standing in the middle of the now empty street, the remnants of the demonstration lingering in the air. She felt a quiet peace settle over her, a calm certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Derrick's death had awakened something within her, a strength she never knew she possessed, a purpose that transcended her personal pain. She looked up at the night sky, her heart swelling with a bittersweet pride. She was still a mother in mourning, still a woman carrying a burden of unimaginable loss. But she was also something more. She was a fighter, a leader, a symbol of resilience and hope. And she knew, deep within her soul, that she would not stop, not until the world had heard her story. Not until justice had been served. Not until her son's memory had become a beacon of change. Grace Thompson's journey had only just begun. But already, she felt the power of her resolve. A silent strength that would carry her through whatever lay ahead, battling doubts and finding strength. In the quiet moments between rallies and meetings, Grace felt the weight of grief settle in again, like a shadow that followed her everywhere. Some mornings, she could barely get out of bed, the crushing pain of Derrick's absence pressing down on her chest. She would sit at the edge of her bed, clutching his favorite photo, a picture of him as a child, smiling brightly, eyes wide with the wonder and innocence that life had slowly chipped away. Some days, the fight felt too heavy, the odds too stacked against her, and she wondered if she was strong enough to keep going. But whenever doubt crept in, she reminded herself of Derrick's voice, his smile, the way he had always spoken about wanting to make a difference. She thought about the future he had dreamed of, the world he had believed in, a world that was fair, just, and compassionate. And she knew, with a resolve that left no room for hesitation, that she could not turn back now. Derrick had always told her that change began with one voice. And now, even though he was gone, his voice still echoed within her, building trust within the community. As Grace's fight continued, she realized the importance of building a foundation of trust within her community. She visited neighbors, old friends, and new supporters alike, sharing her story, listening to theirs. At times, her journey felt isolating. Many people were wary, fearful of drawing attention, of speaking out against a system that held so much power over their lives. Some families she visited had lost loved ones too. Yet they were hesitant to reopen old wounds, afraid that dredging up the past would only bring more pain. Grace understood their fears, she felt them too. But she also saw a spark in their eyes. A glimmer of something unspoken. A desire for justice and dignity that had been buried under years of oppression. She appealed to that spark, reminding them that staying silent would not protect them. That they deserved to be heard, to be valued, to live without fear. Slowly, with each conversation, she began to earn their trust. One person at a time. A growing circle of support. One evening, after a particularly long day, Grace was approached by a group of young women and men, activists who had heard her speak at one of the city council meetings. They were diverse: students, artists, local leaders, all with a shared passion for justice. They had watched her unwavering resolve, her willingness to stand alone. And they were inspired. They wanted to help her, to join her cause, to use their own voices to amplify her message. Grace welcomed them with open arms, feeling an immense gratitude for their support. Together, they formed a small coalition, meeting in her modest living room, late into the night, discussing plans, organizing events, and strategizing ways to reach more people. They pooled their skills and resources, printing flyers, setting up social media accounts, and even creating a website in Derrick's memory. A digital space dedicated to raising awareness about police brutality and racial injustice. The young activists brought energy and creativity to the cause. And Grace felt her spirit lifted by their enthusiasm. For the first time since Derrick's death, she felt a sliver of hope. A belief that maybe, just maybe, change was within reach. Facing hostility and rising above. As Grace's movement gained traction, she faced increasing hostility. She noticed strangers following her at odd hours, received unsettling notes slipped under her door, and even found herself on the receiving end of veiled threats from law enforcement. Her phone rang with anonymous calls at all hours. A constant reminder of the forces working against her. There were times when she was afraid for herself, for her friends, for her community. But she could not allow that fear to control her. Every threat, every shadowed figure, was a reminder that she was making a difference, that her voice was reaching places where silence had reigned for too long. At one of her gatherings, a man confronted her, shouting accusations, attempting to intimidate her into silence. Grace stood her ground, her voice calm but firm. "You may scare me," she said, meeting his gaze with an unflinching resolve. "But you will never silence me. I am fighting for my son. For every mother who has lost a child. For every person who has been wronged. And I will not stop until justice is served." Her words struck a chord with the crowd, and they erupted in applause. Standing with her. A testament to the power of unity and resilience. The first signs of real change. With each passing day, Grace saw the ripple effects of her actions. People who had been silent before were now speaking up, sharing their own stories of injustice, of loved ones lost and dreams shattered. The movement was growing, spreading beyond her neighborhood, drawing the attention of activists and organizations from other cities. Grace was contacted by national civil rights groups, lawyers offering their services pro bono, journalists wanting to interview her, all intrigued by her unrelenting pursuit of justice. One particularly poignant moment came when a woman, older than Grace, approached her after a vigil. Her face was lined with years of hardship, her eyes holding a sadness that seemed to go beyond words. She took Grace's hands in hers, squeezing them tightly, and said, "I lost my son too. 30 years ago. I was too afraid to fight back then. But you are doing what I couldn't. You are giving us all hope." The woman's words left Grace speechless. A profound reminder of the lives she was fighting for, of the generations of silent grief that had gone unaddressed. She felt a renewed sense of purpose. A responsibility to honor not only Derrick's memory but also the memories of every life lost. Every mother's broken heart. Preparing for a major rally. As momentum grew, Grace and her coalition began planning their first major rally, a citywide event that would bring together people from all walks of life. They spent weeks preparing, spreading the word, organizing speakers, and coordinating with other activists. The night before the rally, Grace found herself alone in Derrick's room, surrounded by his things, feeling the enormity of what lay ahead. She sat on his bed, holding his old basketball jersey in her hands, feeling the worn fabric beneath her fingers, a tangible reminder of his presence. She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek as she whispered, "I'm doing this for you, Derrick. I wish you were here to see it. To see how many lives you're touching. You wanted to make a difference. And you are. My son. You are." With renewed resolve, Grace rose, feeling Derrick's spirit with her, a guiding light in the darkness. She knew that the path ahead would be hard, that the road to justice was long and arduous. But she also knew that she was not alone. She carried within her the strength of every life she fought for, the resilience of her community, and the unbreakable love of a mother determined to honor her son. A city holds its breath. The morning of the rally arrived with a quiet intensity that spread across the city. Streets were blocked. Police presence was visible on every corner. And news reporters gathered, anticipating what was rumored to be the largest demonstration the city had ever seen. For many, this rally wasn't just about Derrick's death, it was about years of silent suffering. A demand for respect, justice, and recognition. And at the center of it all was Grace Thompson, a grieving mother who had transformed her pain into a movement of hope and resilience. As the crowd gathered, Grace stood on a small stage set up in the city's main square, looking out over the faces of thousands who had come to support her. Some held signs with Derrick's name, others with powerful messages like "Justice Now" and "End Police Brutality." There were families, young people, elders, all united by a shared longing for change. Grace took a deep breath, feeling a surge of emotion as she realized the magnitude of what she had created. "Today, we are here to demand justice," she began, her voice steady and clear, carrying over the crowd. Justice not only for Derrick but for every person who has been wronged, every family that has been torn apart. We are here to say that our lives matter, that our voices deserve to be heard, and that we will not be silenced. Her words ignited the crowd, their cheers rising in a powerful wave of unity and defiance. Grace felt a fire within her, a strength she hadn't known existed. She spoke from her heart, recounting Derrick's story, the pain of losing him, and her unwavering commitment to ensure that his life had meaning. She could see her words touching people, moving them. And in that moment, she knew that her fight was no longer just her own. It was a collective fight. A shared dream for a world where justice was not just a word, but a reality. Resistance and retaliation. As Grace's movement grew, so did the resistance. The police, feeling the pressure of public scrutiny, began pushing back. They held press conferences where they painted Grace as a troublemaker, accusing her of inciting unrest and creating division in the community. Officials released statements that attempted to discredit her, questioning Derrick's character, even insinuating that his actions might have justified the police's response. The blatant disrespect stung. But Grace knew that this was a tactic to break her resolve, to scare her into silence. Despite the slander, Grace remained focused. She refused to let their words tarnish Derrick's memory. With her coalition, she organized more rallies, more vigils, each event growing in size and strength. They established a hotline for families who had experienced similar injustices, offering them support and connecting them to lawyers willing to take on their cases. Grace's movement was becoming a network of resilience, a safe space for those who had been silenced, a growing community that empowered one another in their fight for justice. But the authorities didn't back down. The police began increasing their presence at her rallies, showing up in riot gear, their faces hard and unyielding. They tried to intimidate the crowd, watching every movement, waiting for any opportunity to shut the events down. The tension was palpable. But Grace stood firm, reminding everyone to remain peaceful, to resist through their strength, not through violence. A test of faith. One evening, after a particularly tense rally, Grace returned home to find a letter slipped under her door. It was anonymous. A single line scrawled across the paper in stark black ink: "Stop, or you'll regret it." She felt a chill run down her spine. But her resolve only hardened. She knew that these threats were meant to scare her into silence, to break her spirit. But for every threat, she found herself growing stronger, more determined to keep going. However, the strain was taking its toll. Her family worried for her safety, and even some of her closest friends began questioning if it was worth it. They urged her to think of herself, to consider the risks. "Grace," one friend pleaded, "you've done so much already. You've opened people's eyes. You've made them care. Maybe it's time to step back." But Grace knew that stepping back wasn't an option. She looked her friend in the eye, her voice filled with quiet determination. "I'm not just fighting for Derrick. I'm fighting for every mother, every father, every person who has been wronged. If I stop now, they'll know that fear can silence us. I won't give them that power." Her words resonated, even among those who doubted. People began to see that her fight wasn't about one person or one case. It was about challenging a system, standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. The rally that changed everything. As the movement gained national attention, Grace and her coalition organized their largest rally yet, a march that would bring people from across the country to stand together in solidarity. The city was tense in the days leading up to the event, with rumors of potential clashes and disruptions. But Grace remained steadfast, urging everyone to stay peaceful, to remember that their power came from their unity and resilience. The day of the rally arrived, and the city's streets filled with people. It was a breathtaking sight, thousands marching together, chanting, holding signs, their voices rising in a powerful chorus for justice. Grace walked at the front, her head held high, flanked by other mothers who had lost children to similar injustices. They walked together, a wall of strength, their steps steady, their eyes forward. But as the march neared City Hall, a line of police officers blocked their path, forming a barricade. The crowd tensed, whispers of uncertainty rippling through them. Grace took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every eye on her. She stepped forward, addressing the officers with a calm, steady voice. "We are here in peace," she said, her words carrying an unmistakable authority. "We are here to be heard, to demand justice, not to incite violence." One of the officers stepped forward, his expression hard, unmoved by her words. He ordered the crowd to disperse, warning that they would face consequences if they did not comply. Grace felt her heart pound. But she stood her ground, her voice unwavering as she responded. "This is our right. We are not here to fight, we are here to be heard." Suddenly, tensions flared. An officer pushed a young man in the crowd. A scuffle broke out, and the situation threatened to spiral out of control. But before it could escalate, Grace raised her hands, calling for calm. "Stay strong," she shouted, her voice ringing out above the chaos. "We are here in peace. Do not let them provoke us. Stand together. Stay united." Her words had a calming effect, the crowd regaining its composure, their voices quieting but their resolve unbroken. Grace stepped back, leading the crowd in a chant of unity, their voices rising in a powerful affirmation of their purpose. The officers, seeing the crowd's discipline and determination, eventually backed down, allowing them to pass. It was a small victory. But for Grace, it was a testament to the power of resilience, a reminder that strength could come from peace, the symbol of hope. In the days that followed, the rally's peaceful outcome made headlines across the country. Grace became a symbol of hope, her story inspiring countless others to stand up against injustice, to fight for change in their own communities. She received letters from people she had never met, sharing their own stories of loss and resilience, thanking her for giving them a voice, for showing them that they were not alone. Grace's journey was far from over, but she felt a deep sense of accomplishment, a pride that could not be dampened by threats or opposition. She had turned her grief into a movement, her pain into a beacon of hope for others. And while the road ahead remained uncertain, she knew one thing for sure: she would keep fighting, keep pushing, keep believing in a world where justice was not just a dream, but a reality. As she stood on the steps of City Hall, looking out over the city that had become her battleground, she felt a calm resolve settle within her. This was just the beginning. Her fight for justice, for Derrick's memory, for every person whose voice had been silenced, would continue. She had become a force of change, a symbol of hope, and she would not stop until her mission was fulfilled. Tensions rising. After the success of the rally, Grace found herself busier than ever. Her phone rang constantly, calls from reporters, lawyers, activists, and families from across the country who wanted to share their stories or offer their support. Each call reminded her that Derrick's death had ignited something powerful, something she couldn't ignore. She was no longer just one mother mourning her son, she was a voice for an entire community that had been silenced for too long. But with the newfound support came increased scrutiny. Local media outlets that had once ignored her story were now paying attention, some casting her as a hero, others portraying her as a disruptive force. Even the city's officials began to take notice, some trying to reach out with words of cautious sympathy, while others worked behind the scenes to contain her influence. Grace knew the attention was both a blessing and a curse. The more visibility she gained, the more powerful her movement became, but it also meant she was under constant watch. A deepening divide. The police, feeling their authority challenged, responded with escalating hostility. Officers were now a constant presence at every rally, monitoring the crowds with wary eyes, their hands resting on their weapons as if waiting for any excuse to intervene. At night, police cruisers would slowly circle her house, their headlights sweeping through her windows, a silent reminder that they were watching. Her neighbors began to worry, some even urging her to stop, afraid that her actions would bring trouble to their doorsteps. One evening, a community leader whom Grace deeply respected pulled her aside after a rally. "Grace," he said gently, his voice filled with concern, I know you're fighting for justice. And I admire you for it. But I worry about the cost. You're putting yourself, your family, and even our neighborhood at risk. The police, they're looking for any excuse to make an example out of you. Grace listened. Understanding his fear. She knew that the price of her fight was high. That her actions could bring consequences not only for herself but for everyone around her. But she also knew that if she stopped now, everything she had worked for would be in vain. The pain of Derrick's loss burned within her. A reminder that this fight was about more than just one life. It was about every life that had been disregarded. Every family left grieving without answers. She looked him in the eyes. Her voice steady and resolute. If I stop now, they win. And I can't let that happen. This fight isn't just mine, it's for all of us. If we don't stand together, they'll keep silencing us. Her words struck a chord. And the man nodded slowly. A glimmer of respect and understanding in his eyes. He didn't agree to stand with her openly. But Grace could tell that her resolve had made an impression. Planting a seed of courage that might one day blossom into support. Support from unexpected allies. As the weeks went on, Grace began receiving unexpected support from people outside her community. Local pastors reached out, offering their churches as meeting spaces and encouraging their congregations to join her cause. A prominent lawyer offered his services, helping her navigate the legal complexities of her fight. Civil rights groups, both local and national, began endorsing her, bringing in resources and volunteers who helped organize events, manage social media, and connect with families who had suffered similar losses. One day, a former police officer reached out to her. He was an older man, retired, with a gentle voice that held the weight of experience. I served for over 30 years, he told her over coffee in a small diner, his hands trembling slightly as he spoke. And I've seen things that made me ashamed to wear that badge. I couldn't do anything then. But I can help now. I can tell you what goes on behind those closed doors. The policies they follow. The tactics they use. I know how they think. I want to help. Grace felt a surge of gratitude and hope. This was an unexpected breakthrough, a chance to understand the very system she was up against. The man became a valuable ally, guiding her coalition on how to counter the police's tactics, sharing information that allowed them to prepare for the challenges they would face. With his insight, they could plan their rallies more strategically, ensuring they remained peaceful and organized even when tensions were high. His presence also brought a new layer of credibility to her cause, challenging the narrative that she was simply stirring trouble. The challenges of unity. As the movement grew, Grace faced new challenges within her own ranks. Different groups began joining the cause, each with its own ideas about how to fight for justice. Some wanted to confront the police directly, to use tactics that Grace feared could lead to violence. Others believed in a quieter, more cautious approach, one that focused on behind-the-scenes lobbying rather than public demonstrations. The diversity of opinions often led to heated debates, with some accusing Grace of being too soft, while others worried that her persistence would bring down the wrath of the authorities. Grace struggled to keep the group united, knowing that division could weaken their cause. She held meetings, patiently listening to every viewpoint, reminding them all that their strength came from their unity. I know we all have different ideas about how to create change, she said during one particularly tense meeting. But we're here for the same reason, to fight for justice. If we let our differences divide us, they win. We cannot let that happen. We must stay together. Even when it's hard. Even when it feels like we're being pulled in different directions. Her words resonated. And the group agreed to compromise, finding ways to support one another's ideas while remaining true to their shared goal. It was a delicate balance, one that required constant effort and understanding. But Grace knew that it was worth it. Every person who stood with her, every voice that joined the chorus, brought them one step closer to the change they were fighting for. A powerful encounter. One day, as she was leaving a meeting at City Hall, Grace was approached by the police chief himself. He was a tall, imposing man with a steely gaze, flanked by two officers who watched her with barely concealed hostility. The chief extended a hand, his face expressionless. "Miss Thompson, I've been hearing a lot about you," he said. His voice measured, carefully controlled. "I respect your commitment to your cause. But I'm here to tell you that you're treading on dangerous ground. You're stirring up anger, creating division in this city. I advise you to reconsider your approach." Grace looked him in the eye, refusing to be intimidated. "With all due respect, Chief, I am not the one creating division. The actions of your officers, the silence of your department, those are the things tearing this city apart. I'm here to demand justice. Nothing more." The chief's eyes narrowed, a flicker of annoyance breaking through his calm exterior. "Justice isn't as simple as you think, Miss Thompson. There are laws, procedures. Change doesn't happen overnight." She met his gaze with unwavering determination. "Then maybe it's time for those laws and procedures to change. We deserve to live in a city where justice isn't a privilege, but a right. I won't stop until that's the reality, for all of us." The chief said nothing more. But Grace could see the tension in his jaw, the frustration in his clenched fists. As he turned to leave, she felt a strange sense of satisfaction. She had stood up to him, challenged him, and she had not backed down. It was a small victory, but one that filled her with a renewed sense of purpose. A community transformed. The impact of Grace's work began to spread, reaching people in places she hadn't expected. Businesses began displaying signs that read "Justice for Derrick" in their windows. Churches held prayer vigils, and schools started discussions on civil rights and police reform. Grace had become a symbol of resilience, her name known throughout the city, her story an inspiration for countless others. One evening, as she walked through her neighborhood, she noticed children playing a game they had made up, where one of them would be Grace, leading a group in a march for justice. She watched, a bittersweet smile on her face, seeing her own strength reflected in their play. She realized that her fight had become something larger than herself, a force that would continue even if she were no longer there. She had planted seeds of hope, seeds of change, and now they were beginning to bloom. Her heart swelled with a mixture of pride and humility. She was still just a mother grieving her son, still a woman carrying the weight of loss. But she was also something more, a leader, a fighter, a voice for those who could not speak. And as she looked around at her transformed community, she knew that her journey, though fraught with hardship, was worth every step. The march forward. With each passing day, Grace's movement grew stronger, her resolve unwavering. She faced threats, resistance, and doubt. But she also found allies, support, and hope in places she had never expected. She had united a city, challenged a system, and transformed grief into a beacon of resilience. Her journey was far from over. But Grace Thompson had become a force to be reckoned with, a symbol of justice, a leader of change, and a mother whose love had transcended loss, lighting the path forward for a new generation. The threat of division. As Grace's movement continued to gain traction, the city's officials grew increasingly uncomfortable. Some politicians subtly tried to align themselves with her, offering quiet support while still hesitating to take any public stance that might disrupt their own agendas. Others, however, saw her movement as a threat. They began to sow seeds of division, spreading rumors within the community, suggesting that Grace's actions would bring unnecessary consequences to their neighborhoods. Some people in the community began to worry, afraid that her fight would lead to police crackdowns or economic repercussions for local businesses. They questioned if she was pushing too hard, if her demands were too great. Grace faced these questions with patience, understanding the fears and hesitations that her neighbors felt. She held community meetings, reassuring them of her intentions, reminding them that justice for Derrick was justice for everyone, that her fight was rooted in the shared values of respect and dignity. Her steadfastness reassured many, but a few still expressed doubts. One man, a local business owner, spoke up at a meeting, his tone accusatory. "Grace, we respect what you're doing, but we have families to feed. We can't afford to be caught in the crossfire. What if this all backfires?" Grace looked him in the eyes, her gaze calm but fierce. "I understand your concerns. I do. But if we stay silent, nothing will change. This isn't just about me or my son, it's about all of us. About creating a future where we don't have to live in fear. A future where our children can walk these streets without looking over their shoulders. I can't promise this will be easy, but I promise it will be worth it." Her words silenced the room. And slowly, one by one, people began to nod. The man who had spoken up gave her a hesitant smile, an acknowledgement that, despite his fears, he believed in her cause. Growing bonds of solidarity. As Grace's message continued to spread, more people reached out to offer support. Community leaders from neighboring towns, prominent activists from larger cities, and even well-known civil rights figures began contacting her, wanting to stand beside her in solidarity. Some sent messages of encouragement, others showed up at her rallies, lending their voices to her cause. Grace was moved by the support, grateful that Derrick's story had resonated with so many. She became friends with a woman named Linda, a seasoned activist who had led similar movements in her own community. Linda was wise, charismatic, and unafraid to speak truth to power. She had witnessed the same injustices, lost friends to the same system, and understood the challenges Grace was facing. Together, they organized workshops, teaching young people in the community about their rights, about activism, about the power of peaceful resistance. Linda became a mentor to Grace, guiding her, sharing her experiences, and offering advice on how to sustain a movement that had started with such raw, personal pain. One evening, after a particularly long day, Linda took Grace aside. "I've seen people like you before, Grace. Strong, determined. But I've never seen anyone with your heart. You have something special. Something that people believe in. You're not just a leader, you're a symbol. Don't forget that. Don't let them make you doubt yourself." Grace felt a surge of gratitude and strength. Linda's words reminded her that her journey, as challenging as it was, held meaning beyond her grief. She was becoming a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of resilience and the love a mother carried for her son. The toll on her family and relationships. As Grace became more involved in the movement, her personal life began to feel the strain. Her family worried for her, her siblings calling frequently, pleading with her to prioritize her safety. They knew her passion, understood her pain, but feared that her unrelenting commitment to justice would lead her into dangerous territory. Grace's nights were often sleepless, filled with planning, calls, and meetings, leaving her exhausted. She sometimes wondered if her fight was costing her too much, her peace, her family, her own sense of self. One night, Her younger sister, Marie, came to visit. Sitting in Grace's small living room, Marie voiced the concerns Grace had avoided. "Grace, I admire what you're doing. I do. But I'm worried about you. You look tired. And I'm scared that this fight, that it's taking too much from you. Derrick wouldn't want you to lose yourself in this." Grace took her sister's hand, squeezing it tightly, her eyes filling with tears. "I understand, Marie. I know you're worried. But this isn't just about Derrick anymore. It's about all the lives that could be saved. All the families who won't have to go through what I went through. I don't know how to explain it. But I feel like this is what I'm meant to do. As long as I have the strength, I have to keep going." Marie hugged her tightly, a quiet understanding passing between them. She didn't fully agree, but she respected Grace's commitment. And in that moment, Grace realized that even if she lost everything, even if the cost was high, she would continue. Her purpose was clear, and nothing could deter her. A citywide boycott and the power of unity. Inspired by Grace's determination, her coalition proposed a citywide boycott of businesses that supported the police's stance against her movement. They called for people to stop shopping at stores that had openly aligned themselves with authorities, hoping that financial pressure would force the city to take their demands seriously. It was a bold move, one that carried risks. But Grace agreed, believing that it would send a powerful message. The boycott gained momentum quickly. News outlets covered it. Community members joined in. And local businesses began to feel the effects. Store owners who had initially ignored her movement now found themselves struggling, their revenue declining as more people refused to spend money in places that didn't support justice. Some business owners approached Grace, pleading with her to call off the boycott. They promised to reconsider their positions, to publicly support her cause if it meant an end to the economic pressure. Grace met with them, laying out her expectations clearly and calmly. "This isn't just about saying you support us," she told them. "We need real change, commitments to fair treatment, donations to our cause, efforts to raise awareness. If you're willing to stand with us, then we'll stand with you. But if not, we'll continue the boycott." Her stance forced many to take a side. Some businesses joined her, becoming allies in the fight, while others held firm in their opposition. But Grace's coalition had made a point, their voices held power. And they would not back down. The turning point. As the boycott continued, the police chief and city officials grew increasingly concerned. Behind closed doors, they began to discuss concessions, weighing the risks of giving in to her demands versus the consequences of continued resistance. Grace had created a movement that could no longer be ignored. A movement that held the city in a quiet, powerful grip. In a surprising turn of events, the mayor reached out to her, requesting a private meeting. Grace agreed, cautiously optimistic. When she arrived at City Hall, she was met not only by the mayor but by several city council members and the police chief. The atmosphere was tense, each official carefully choosing their words as they discussed potential compromises, strategies for moving forward without further escalation. The mayor looked her in the eye, his expression weary. "Miss Thompson, you've made it clear that this city cannot ignore the issues you're raising. We are willing to consider reforms, to work with your coalition. But we need assurances that your protests will remain peaceful, that this boycott will end." Grace felt a surge of triumph, though she kept her face calm. "We have always been peaceful, Mr. Mayor. All we want is accountability, justice, and a fair chance at a safe community. Work with us honestly, and we'll stand down when we see real change, not before." The mayor nodded, understanding that this was her line in the sand. They agreed to begin discussions, setting up a committee that included Grace and several of her coalition members to oversee police reforms, review policies, and address community grievances. It was a small victory, a first step, but it was real progress. Grace left City Hall that day with a renewed sense of hope, knowing that her fight was beginning to bear fruit, a symbol of change. As news of the meeting spread, Grace's community erupted in celebration. They had won a critical victory, one that validated their months of hard work, their perseverance, their resilience. Grace's name was now synonymous with courage and justice. Her story an inspiration to communities across the country. Families who had once grieved in silence now saw in her a beacon of hope, a reminder that change was possible, that even the deepest pain could be transformed into a force for good. But Grace knew her journey was far from over. This victory was only the beginning. There were more battles to fight, more lives to uplift, more voices to amplify. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, Grace stood ready, her spirit unbroken, her heart filled with the quiet, fierce determination of a mother who had turned grief into power. Grace Thompson had become a symbol, a mother, a fighter, a leader. And as she looked out over her city, she knew she would continue to fight, to push, to believe, until justice was not just a promise, but a reality for everyone, a movement beyond the city. As news of the city's commitment to police reform spread, Grace's story began to capture national attention. Major news networks covered her journey, portraying her as a mother who had transformed her grief into a fight for justice. Communities across the country, inspired by her resilience, began organizing their own movements, echoing her calls for reform and accountability. Grace's name became synonymous with hope, her story a rallying cry for those who had been silenced by fear and oppression. For the first time, Grace felt the weight of what she had accomplished. She had started this journey alone, driven by love for her son, fueled by a desire to give his death meaning. But now, her fight had grown into something far larger, a nationwide movement for justice, for equality, for dignity. Grace knew that Derrick's spirit lived on in every protest, every rally, every act of defiance. His dream of a just world had become her mission, a mission that was now shared by countless others. The price of change. But with newfound influence came new challenges. Grace found herself constantly traveling, speaking at rallies, attending meetings with lawmakers, and consulting with civil rights leaders. She was no longer just a mother in mourning, she had become a figure of national importance, a leader whose voice carried weight in rooms where decisions were made. She knew the work was critical, but the relentless schedule took its toll. She missed her family, her quiet moments of reflection, the chance to grieve for Derrick in peace. Her life had been transformed, and she often felt overwhelmed, as if she was carrying the weight of the entire movement on her shoulders. In the quiet hours of the night, when the world was still, Grace would sit alone, feeling the exhaustion settle in her bones. She missed Derrick deeply, missed the life they could have shared. She wondered if he would have been proud of her, if he would have understood the choices she had made. But even in her solitude, she felt his presence, a comforting whisper that reminded her of the purpose she had found through her pain. A defining moment. As her influence grew, Grace was invited to speak at a national summit on civil rights, an event that would be attended by prominent leaders, activists, and even the president. It was a momentous occasion, one that symbolized the impact of her journey. Standing before a room filled with powerful figures, she felt a wave of emotions, pride, gratitude, and a touch of disbelief that her voice had reached this far. Her speech was raw, honest, filled with the pain of loss and the hope of transformation. "I did not choose this fight," she began, her voice steady but tinged with sorrow. "I did not ask to be here, to carry the weight of justice on my shoulders. But I am here because my son, my beautiful, bright, loving son, was taken from me. From us. By a system that saw him as less than human." The audience was silent, captivated by her words, moved by the authenticity of her grief. But through that pain, I found purpose. I found a reason to keep going. To fight for a world where every life is valued, where every voice is heard. This is not just about one life, one family, or one city. This is about all of us. It is about building a future where justice is not a privilege but a right. Her words resonated deeply, the room erupting in applause. Grace knew that the fight was far from over. But this moment felt like a victory. A powerful affirmation that her son's memory had sparked something that could no longer be ignored. Concrete change. Following her speech, momentum for police reform swept across the country. Grace's city was the first to implement sweeping changes. A new oversight board was established. Independent investigations became mandatory for cases involving police misconduct. And community policing initiatives were launched to rebuild trust. The city council voted to allocate funding for social services aimed at addressing the root causes of crime, focusing on education, housing, and mental health support rather than punitive measures. Grace was invited to serve as an advisor on the oversight board, her role ensuring that the voices of victims' families were always present in conversations about reform. The responsibility was immense. But she embraced it, knowing that her presence was a safeguard against complacency, a reminder of the people these policies were meant to protect. As other cities watched the success of these reforms, they began adopting similar policies. Grace's city became a model for progressive change. And she found herself invited to consult with leaders from across the nation. Her voice now a guiding force for reform on a larger scale. A legacy of hope. Back in her hometown, Grace's coalition continued to thrive, organizing workshops, mentoring programs, and community outreach events. The young activists she had inspired became leaders in their own right, carrying forward the principles of unity and peaceful resistance that she had instilled in them. Grace was proud to see her vision taking root in the next generation. Proud to know that her fight had become a lasting movement. In honor of Derrick's memory, she established the Derrick Thompson Foundation for Justice and Equality, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting families affected by police violence, advocating for reform, and providing scholarships to underprivileged youth. Through this foundation, Derrick's legacy lived on, a testament to his life and the impact he had even after his passing. The foundation became a pillar in the community, offering resources and hope to those who needed it most, ensuring that Grace's fight for justice would continue for generations. Grace's final message. Years later, Grace was invited back to her hometown to deliver a keynote speech at the annual Derrick Thompson Memorial Rally. Standing on the same stage where she had once stood, surrounded by thousands who had been touched by her journey, she looked out over the crowd with a heart filled with gratitude and pride. She saw familiar faces, friends, neighbors, the young activists she had mentored, alongside countless new faces, people who had joined the movement, inspired by her resilience. She took a deep breath, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. When I started this journey, I was a grieving mother. I was alone, unsure of how to make sense of the pain I felt. But I learned that even in our darkest moments, we can find strength. We can find purpose. I did not expect to become a leader. But sometimes, life calls us to be more than we thought possible. Her voice wavered with emotion. But she continued. Derrick's death was a tragedy. a loss that no words can truly capture. But through his memory, we have found a path forward. A path that leads to justice, to compassion, to change. We have proven that one voice can inspire thousands. That one life can spark a movement. And as long as we continue to fight, as long as we continue to believe, we will carry his spirit with us. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the city. Grace felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet understanding that her work had created something lasting, something that would continue to grow long after she was gone. A life transformed. As she left the stage, surrounded by friends and supporters, Grace felt a warmth that filled every corner of her heart. She was no longer just a mother in mourning, she was a symbol of hope, a voice for justice, a testament to the power of resilience. She had turned her grief into something beautiful, something that could heal and inspire others. She had honored Derrick's memory in the most powerful way possible, by building a world that was a little closer to the one he had dreamed of. Her journey had been long, marked by loss, struggle, and sacrifice. But it had also been filled with love, unity, and triumph. Grace Thompson had become more than a symbol, she had become a legacy. A reminder that even in the face of unimaginable pain, we have the power to create change. As she walked through the crowd, surrounded by people whose lives had been touched by her journey, Grace felt Derrick's presence beside her, a comforting reminder that her love for him had changed the world. And in that moment, she knew that her journey, though hard, had been worth every step. As Grace's story spread nationwide, families who had once suffered in silence began sharing their own experiences, finding comfort in knowing they weren't alone. Letters poured in from people across the country, parents, siblings, friends who had lost loved ones to similar injustices. They thanked Grace for her courage, for being the voice they hadn't been able to find in their own pain. Each letter touched her deeply, a reminder that her fight had reached people in places she'd never expected. Grace read every single letter, sometimes with tears streaming down her face. Each story was a testament to the resilience of those who had been wronged, a reminder that her fight was not just for Derrick, but for everyone who had been silenced. She kept these letters in a small wooden box on her desk, her own personal archive of the lives she was fighting for. It became a source of strength in her darkest moments, a collection of voices that echoed her determination and fortified her resolve. Strengthening the community. Grace's influence had transformed her community. Her coalition continued to grow, now offering a range of programs aimed at uplifting and empowering its members. They organized job training, legal aid workshops, and mental health support sessions, all designed to address the needs of a community that had long been underserved. She knew that true change wasn't just about reforming policies but also about giving people the tools and resources they needed to thrive. The community began to change in ways that went beyond politics. Parents felt safer allowing their children to play outside. Young people had role models and mentors they could look up to, and families came together to support one another. Grace often walked through the neighborhood, stopping to chat with children who recognized her, sharing stories and laughter with neighbors. She was no longer just Derrick's mom, she was a respected leader, a friend, a guiding light for the people around her. One day, as she was visiting a local community center, a young girl approached her, clutching a notebook filled with sketches. "Miss Thompson," the girl said, her eyes bright with excitement, "I want to be like you when I grow up. I want to make the world a better place." Grace knelt down to the girl's level, her heart swelling with emotion. She gently took the girl's hands and smiled. "You already have that power, sweetheart. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. Just keep dreaming. Keep believing. And remember, you have a whole community behind you." A friendship forged in the fire. Through her journey, Grace had formed a deep friendship with Linda, the seasoned activist who had become her mentor. Linda had been with her through the hardest moments, offering guidance, support, and a listening ear when the weight of the fight felt too heavy to bear. Together, they worked on the foundation Grace had established in Derrick's memory, each lending their unique strengths to create something lasting and impactful. One evening, after a long day of meetings, they sat together on Grace's porch, the evening air cool and calm. Linda looked at Grace, a soft smile on her face. "You know," she said, her voice gentle, "I've been in this fight for decades. But I've never seen anyone like you. You've changed lives. Grace. Not just with your voice, but with your heart. That's something rare. Something powerful." Grace felt a lump form in her throat, deeply moved by her friend's words. "I couldn't have done it without you. Linda. You showed me the way. Helped me believe I could make a difference. I owe so much to you." Linda took her hand, her gaze warm. "This was always within you, Grace. I just helped you find it. Now, it's your turn to help others do the same." Their friendship was a bond forged through shared struggle, a sisterhood that transcended age and experience. They had become each other's anchor, a source of unwavering support in a world that often felt chaotic and unforgiving. Unexpected allies in high places. As Grace's movement grew, she began receiving support from unexpected places. Several public figures reached out to her, some offering to fund her foundation, others using their platforms to amplify her message. Politicians, too, took notice, with some inviting her to speak at city councils, town halls, and even congressional hearings. Grace was initially wary of the attention, hesitant to trust figures who might have their own agendas. But she soon realized that these alliances were crucial in pushing her message even further. One politician in particular, a congresswoman named Sarah Martinez, stood out. Sarah had a history of advocating for social justice and reform, and she saw in Grace a leader whose mission aligned with her own values. Together, they drafted a proposal for a federal Derrick's Law, a comprehensive bill aimed at increasing accountability and transparency within police departments nationwide. Standing beside Sarah on the steps of the Capitol, Grace spoke passionately about the importance of the bill, her words carrying the weight of every life lost to police brutality. "This is not just legislation," she declared to the gathered crowd. "It is a promise. A promise that we will not allow our loved ones' lives to be forgotten. That we will fight for a world where justice is not just a dream but a reality." The proposal sparked a national conversation, with people across the country rallying in support. For Grace, it was a surreal moment, a testament to the power of her fight and the possibility of real, systemic change. A visit to Derrick's grave. Amid her whirlwind schedule, Grace finally took a moment to visit Derrick's grave. She stood in the quiet cemetery, the weight of the past few years pressing down on her. She knelt beside his headstone, tracing her fingers over his name, feeling the raw ache of his absence. "I miss you, Derrick," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I wish you could see all of this, the people, the change, the hope. You were right about everything. You believed in a world that was better than this. And I promise I'll keep fighting to make that world real." She sat there in silence, letting herself feel the full weight of her grief, her love, her pride. The wind rustled the leaves around her, and she felt a quiet peace settle over her. In that moment, she knew that Derrick was with her, that his spirit had been her strength, her guide, her inspiration. She left the cemetery feeling renewed, As if Derrick had given her a final gift, the assurance that she was on the right path. That her fight was his legacy. A final victory and a lasting legacy. After months of hard work, tireless advocacy, and relentless pressure from communities across the country, Derrick's law was finally passed. The legislation established nationwide standards for police accountability, mandating body cameras, independent oversight boards, and mental health training for officers. It was a monumental victory. A piece of legislation that would save lives and prevent other families from experiencing the same pain that Grace had endured. Grace's foundation continued to thrive, offering scholarships, mentorship programs, and support for families affected by police violence. Schools were named after Derrick. His name and legacy woven into the fabric of a better world. Grace was invited to speak at universities, conferences, and international forums. Her story an inspiration to those fighting for justice around the globe. But for Grace, her greatest victory was not the legislation, the recognition, or the fame. It was the knowledge that her son's life had ignited a movement, that his memory had sparked a change that would echo through generations. She had turned her pain into purpose, her grief into hope, and her love into a legacy that would endure long after she was gone. An unbreakable legacy. Years passed, and Grace's story became part of the nation's history. Her name was mentioned alongside civil rights icons. Her journey studied in classrooms. Her impact felt in communities everywhere. But in her heart, she remained simply a mother who had fought for her son, for her community, for a world where every life was valued. One day, as she sat on her porch, a young woman approached her, holding a child by the hand. The woman looked at Grace with awe. Her eyes filled with admiration. "Miss Thompson," she said softly, "I just wanted to say thank you. I grew up hearing your story, and it gave me the courage to pursue my own dreams, to believe in a better world. You changed my life." Grace smiled, a gentle warmth filling her heart. She looked at the young woman and her child, feeling the continuation of her journey in their presence. "Thank you," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "But remember, the change was always within you. You just needed to believe in it." As the woman walked away, Grace felt a profound peace. A quiet understanding that her legacy was unbreakable. That her love for Derrick had transformed not just her life, but the lives of countless others. She sat back, watching the world she had helped create, a world filled with resilience, unity, and hope. And in that moment, she knew that she had fulfilled her promise to Derrick. That her journey, though marked by pain and struggle, had been a journey of love. A journey that had changed the world.